We got a great reception to the products that we displayed. What we didn't do was actually have someone at the end of the line to answer phone calls as the phone number appeared on the TV. We're too busy celebrating in the pub. And that was my first big lesson in my first role, to really think, I guess, right through to the end. We now have 13 billion of B2B revenue going through platforms globally. Definitely from those small pilots, to growing up in the business as a real key touch point.
Welcome to the B2B Experience, brought to you by Big Light, Europe's leading independent experience design agency. In this podcast series, we speak to digital pioneers in B2B and tell real stories of breaking down barriers and delivering change. I'm Steve Borges, and my guest today is John Kelly, Global Digital Director, or former, I should say, Global Digital Director at the Heineken company. So welcome, John.
Thanks, Steve. Really nice to be on this podcast with you.
So John, after just about 15 years creating and growing e-commerce inside Heineken, you've now stepped down and you're on a mission to help others. So before we get into that mission, I'd like to just start off by maybe you giving an overview of your previous role at Heineken. And I know I abbreviated your title. I did it on purpose because it was a bit of a mouthful. So if you could give me an overview of that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So my role was at Heineken really started off deploying B2B e-commerce in global. So that was 9 years ago. And then it moved into more transformational projects on strategy, including eRetail, deployment of AI and loyalty. And I had the fortunate experience of going to many countries around the globe during those roles. And you're right, some of my role titles were mouthfuls. And actually the last three did not exist before. So they were new role titles, even for Heineken in this age of digital.
Very good. So we'll get into all of that. But before we do, I'd like to sort of take a step back to the young lad growing up in the west of Ireland on a farm, and your journey from there through to Heineken.
My values come from growing up on that small farm, which became a very successful farm in the west of Ireland, a place called Galway at the Moray. And, that whole ethos of hard work, that work ethic through the farm, being entrepreneurial, I think, honesty and being yourself. And at the same time, my parents were quite innovative and tried new things. Even at one stage, my dad, to improve the pedigree of the farm, brought embryos from the US and Canada to skip a few generations. So it was always on the new end, challenging, disrupting, and did very well. I was the eldest boy, but didn't take over the business and decided to plow my own furrow, as they say. So I did food science, food business in University College Cork in the south of the country. And then I did a master's in marketing. And from there, I suppose my career is in really three parts. My grounding was in small companies. So I started in a company called Kilbride Class Cuisine, run by chefs, actually. Had great fun there, made a lot of mistakes, and then moved to a distributor. So that was my first kind of 5 years working in distribution, warehousing, mainly in commercial roles. So I found myself moving into sales and marketing. And maybe before I go on to the other two parts, one quick story from my first role. I think I may have told you this, but remember, this is back in the 90s, so pre-social media. And we just launched a B2C business. So we're primarily B2B. I guess the term B2B, B2C wasn't even around then. And I wanted to get the word out there. So I rang our national broadcaster called RTE, Radio Telefísión, and got onto a afternoon show. So skipped marketing agencies and got in to see two of the stars at the time. And it was fantastic. it blew us away. We got a great reception to the products that we displayed. We had a chef on TV. What we didn't do was actually have someone at the end of the line to answer phone calls as the phone number appeared on the TV. We're too busy celebrating in the pub. And that was my first big lesson in my first role, to really think, I guess, right through to the end. What happens if this is successful? What do we do next? But we learned from that and moved on. And I had an amazing journey in those 18 years, but really the grounding and bedrock of, my commercial experience in Nestle, also Glanbia, a food ingredients firm. And in those small businesses, really, that was the foundation to deploy transformation at scale in Musgrave and then in Heineken.
Many people talk about having an experience or a period in their background where they grew up, if you know what I mean. Grew up commercially, if you like. I know when mine was. When was yours?
You're right. There's definitely spurts of growth. It's like if you have kids, sometimes your kids go through these growth spurts. And I had a few. I mean, you always learn, and I have an insatiable curiosity to learn new things. I think the move from small business, which I felt comfortable in coming from that farmhold in the west of Ireland, into bigger business like Glanbia and Nestle, and managing stakeholders, the level of governance that was involved, annual plans, strategic planning, which I wasn't used to. And that was definitely a step up for me as well. So I suppose it's a great question. I've never been asked that before, but those two steps, those two growth spurts, I guess, were probably the biggest.
Great, thank you. And then into Heineken. I read the other day, because just as I was thinking about our conversation, about what characterizes FMCG businesses, and I think I'll mention it because I think it will be a nice juxtaposition of our conversation. And it's described as, it's characterized by extreme operational discipline. It's process heavy, execution led, and displays a low tolerance to risk. So I think that's a nice framing of what we're about to discuss. So there you were in Heineken, and I know that you were offered an opportunity after not long in the business to, as you said, you have an unsatiable curiosity to learn new things, an opportunity to go off to Amsterdam and do something new. So let's talk about, tell me about what happened there. What actually happened?
9 years ago in Heineken, I was sales director in Heineken Ireland, and a role I loved. And the chief commercial officer at the time, he came for a visit into the Irish OpCo. And in a career conversation, he said, what next for you? And I said, I want a challenge. I want to do something new that will have a global impact. About 6 months later, a call came on this small B2B project that was kicking off in global. So my first move was to move from commercial into the build part of the business, which was our digital and technology team, and also to establish a deployment team. So people that would work in market with the local operating companies that had expertise across commercial and digital. And they were the first moves towards really getting the pilots underway, embedding capabilities around digital business transformation, and creating belief in those local operating companies around B2B and how it could really transform how we go to markets.
There's obviously challenges in creating belief amongst those in-market teams, but how did you start off by creating belief within your own team? I mean, you called it an action team, I think, at one point, but how did you create that belief to start with?
So we recruited people who were, I suppose, almost evangelists in those markets to come to global. So they already had an embedded belief, right? So that was one. And two, creating a nice balance in the team was important. So where there was, I would almost say, a lot of confidence around it, but no ego, because really we had to bring people with us. And then, really engendering that belief in the team, we started to work, I hate using the word, but in an agile way. So we had, sprints every morning, or we had our rituals in place, like our meeting first thing in the morning where we got together. It was very informal, no PowerPoint, and it was a cross-functional team. So it really started to try and create that team dynamic. Um, and start to recognize those early wins, early positive customer feedback, the first number of customers onboarding and the second and third orders coming on, where we could start to see retention coming through. So those early wins were really important as well, Steve, to kind of bring confidence into the team that we're starting to make a difference.
So you described in a previous conversation a scenario where the business had made some quite big bets on new functionality and things to do with credit, and put that functionality out there, and it bombed. And then you're describing now an agile kind of iterative approach. How did that shift come about? And how did the organization, or you as an individual, or that you as a team, recognize that it was important to move from that digital bets to digital incremental innovation?
I guess in one sense, you have to recognize the financial processes that are in a business. Just as you described FMCG, it's not as if they're going to go away. We're not going to transform to a tech company. So acknowledging that there is a 12-month annual plan, an SP, and how do we work towards that is important. But at the same time, that dilemma of how do you manage in an agile sprint fashion way and show results was key. So we had to blend the two. And just to give you maybe a couple of stories and examples, showing the impact of how sprints work was really important. So one good example was from Mexico, where we had got to the stage of beyond getting started to really about 30-40% of fragmented trade revenue now going through B2B e-commerce. So we're at a point where we could start to think about other functionalities and how it could really impact beyond just order taking. And one of those was, a question we asked was, could we get customers to start checking their fridge planograms? So were products placed in the right way, in the right places to optimize selling in front of the consumer? And also importantly, they were willing to take a photo and send it back to us to be checked. And this was obviously the role sometimes of the merchandiser or the rep. So it was helping productivity for them to focus time elsewhere. And of course, that merchandiser rep only called maybe once, twice a week, whereas the customer was there every day, and there's always going to be some downtime for the customer. So that first couple of sprints established and affirmed our hypothesis that customers will merchandise. From there, we start to scale, try different segments, and only then did we start to invest behind technology. So that was a good example. And now that's scaled, linked to our loyalty scheme where customers earn points and they can redeem them for either gifts, umbrellas, merchandise, etc., or free product. And that's been really successful in Mexico. And you're right, there was an example where we had a big bet around credit in the same country, but which didn't succeed. And there's a lot of investment put behind it because of the belief of maybe some senior stakeholders. And I can see where it came from, because in other countries, it's worked quite well. And of course, what general managers loved was the low cost.
Before you proved your case in terms of either the value you deliver or the losses that you prevented, can you think of a time where there was, because of the nature of the FMC business, is you wouldn't normally associate with this sort of innovation. Can you think of a time where you overcame some resistance that you didn't think you would overcome? So you overcame some resistance that surprised you.
There was a lot of disbelief at the start around B2B, because they had a challenging experience onboarding telesales, even though it was quite successful because it's such an impact on the organization. And there was definitely some nights going back to the hotel in Mexico City where I thought, this is not going to work. This is really challenging. And it's such a big, multi-billion organization for us, with thousands of employees in commercial alone. So it was quite a big gargantuan business. And what gave me hope at the time was a regional sales director who believed, just one stakeholder in Mexico City. And we tested there, and he really brought on board his own team. And he was also a key stakeholder for us also in the sales leadership team of Mexico. And also, even within his team, he dedicated one of his sales reps to join our. And so those two steps for us, that's really what brought us back hope, belief, to really start to mobilize the project. Because of course, there's many projects at the time before B2B became quite big, and you were fighting for airtime all the time. But because of his belief and the dedication of that rep, who was also a strong voice in the sales team, brought along the other reps. Then belief started to come. Then it became, okay, this could be a national project in Mexico. But trust me, Steve, at the start, there's definitely times I was wondering, what the hell am I doing here? So being able to manage that and almost translate that as we're deploying it, because it was a huge change management process, was quite key. So those individuals and those kind of early steps in testing and creating that belief with senior stakeholders so that we got it to the leadership team, that's what overcame that initial big challenge of, is this ever going to get off the ground?
Great. So from those initial challenges through to success, more success in Mexico and elsewhere, would you just characterize, and then a further 8 years or 7 years of activity? So before we move on, it would be good to kind of say whatever you are able to say about where you got to with that. In a way, what you are most proud of having achieved with your colleagues as a result of that journey.
In the end, I mean, what's publicly available is we now have, 13 billion of B2B revenue going through platforms globally. So that is over 2/3 of our fragmented trade revenue, which was our focus, as opposed to.
And sorry, John, just to interrupt, but just to presumably that revenue previously went through distribution.
Yeah, so it was already, I suppose, a lot of that revenue was going through in traditional forms. So it was either going through sales reps, customer service, distributors, as you mentioned, whereas now everything was digitized. So which gave us a lot of data, et cetera. And I guess that's definitely from those small pilots, to growing up in the business as a real key touch point, digital touch point in our route to consumer. I think the other thing I'm quite proud of the team and what we achieved was really embedding customer centricity in the organization. So, deploying, I suppose, customer gauge as a company, but a net promoter score, where really we embedded that mindset. And that's the most challenging thing, of focusing on the customer first, your business challenge and your objective, and the technology second. And we tend to, especially in today, with everything that's new and coming down the track and seeing some great examples, of starting there first, but really embedding customer centricity. I think that outside of B2B itself and deploying that at scale, and a lot of people were involved in that. I was one small part of it. Customer centricity for me was also another key part of that. And don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of challenges. There's a lot of, as you mentioned at the start, around FMCG being process driven. But at the same time, there's a lot of winning people at senior levels to get behind it, once you could show the evidence.
Great, thank you. Before we move on, actually, no conversation in 2026 would be complete without touching on AI. And I know that that's one of the things that you've been focusing on over the last few years. It would be great just to hear at least one story, because is it overhyped? Isn't it? How do we create practical use cases that add value? And I know you've been successful in a number of those. So I wonder if you could give me a story about one of those.
Yeah, yeah, no. And you're right. It's such a buzzword, but to practically deploy it at scale is takes effort, right? It's not impossible, but it does take effort. And maybe one example was something we did once we had scaled B2B deployment, started getting transaction data. We tested the whole concept of, because in a lot of our markets, Steve, we have almost milk rounds for our reps, right? So where you as a customer, if I visit you the first Tuesday of every month, it would be the same every month. So our hypothesis was, could we dynamically route reps to go to customers when they needed them most? So for her to visit that customer when there was either an opportunity or a challenge. And secondly, to have the next best action or discussion with that customer. So this was quite a significant move for our sales force. And again, just because we're talking about it in Mexico and also the UK, that was deployed at scale. Now, when we initially did it, it was 18 months of testing. So I'm trying to understand what triggers were important, be it, weather, transaction data, customer service feedback, etc. So compiling, these multiple triggers, we start to test, moving from those, I would almost call stationary milk rounds, to dynamic routing, where reps, each week got a new route based on what was required. It's the responsibility, of course, of the companies to really train those sales reps to have those category conversations where you're talking, or, business development conversations, as opposed to taking the order, which was there before. So I think using those algorithms to dynamically route reps was a game changer.
You've got a specific model and the way you think of the phases of growth that you think is valuable or might be valuable for other organizations in a similar position.
Yeah. So I've had 15 amazing years with Heineken, and we'll always look back with gratefulness, and, the experience I've gained, from being a sales director right to working on global projects, and the exposure I have to the markets and technology and teams, which were amazing. But you're right, yeah, moving into supporting other companies and really seeing them successful. One of the reflections I had as I look back was, you're right, I'll call it 3+1. I didn't mention a plus one, but I'll get to it. So at that start, really starting up, the focus of onboarding customers was really key. So the 3 stages: first is just starting up, where you have little revenue going through it. It's currently just a test. That phase is one of the more crucial phases, because that can either create belief, or, people will lose interest and move on to something else, whatever the project is around technology or business transformation. And then once the right metrics in place and measure success, then moving forward, then really into, really starting to grow the business beyond that 10-20% of your revenue going through that platform, of focused on retention and beginning to grow the business incrementally. So you're starting to onboard customers. Your measure is moving from customers who have placed their first order to, well, what percentage of our orders are now online. And then, finally, I guess you're in a place where actually now more than 50% of our revenue is going through this touch point. And I know I'm going through this quite quickly, but how do we start to really grow the business? What levers can we use, whether it be AI or an omni-channel approach where we give information back to reps or customer service to grow our average order value with those customers that are now online? And what's important is that you don't start to measure success around incrementality in phase one, which is a real challenge because you will be challenged as a business to say, okay, we're investing this money, behind this pilot around technology B2B, when do I see the payback? And really it's a lot of the input measures at that stage that you start to focus on, be it improved customer service, ease of transaction, before you start to see the output measures. And that patience to wait until you have a business case down the line and you prove the pilot is quite important. So those three phases of really starting and focusing on onboarding customers and the right measures to really then starting to, get there, where you have a percentage of revenue going through to rocking it, I would call it the third phase. And the plus one, and a lot of businesses move here too quickly, is new business models. So when you start to think about maybe marketplaces, multi-category, you know, moving into different channels, maybe selling your software as a service to other companies or going into partnerships. Those new business models are always very exciting, and you always have a lot of, I would say, bright, intelligent people at a senior level challenging you to do that maybe too early.
And one of the things you touched on it there, actually, but I know it's something we've discussed before, the real challenge of demonstrating value through that journey.
It really is. And also, what type of value, Steve? So, you might find that you're looking for a business case at a pilot stage, and of course, you have a hypothesis of what value you could bring in for the total business. But really, at those early stages, aligning on what's your measure of success is really important. And I've been challenged with this myself in the early days in Asia, where, we got to a steering committee and, someone comes in to ask about a totally new KPI that we hadn't aligned on. Be it, what about the average margin per customer? How has that improved? How have we, which is a great question. There's nothing wrong with it. But our focus was more on what percentage of orders are now online by customer. So, and of course, you get into, interesting conversations like that, where you might have multiple KPIs on one pilot, but really focusing on one primary target where the whole team are focused behind it and creating an alignment around that, even if it's only for 3 weeks, for a sprint, probably was my biggest learning.
You're taking the show on the road, so to speak. Where do you want to take it?
So, great question. I would love over the next 2 to 3 years to have a nice portfolio of clients on board. I suppose ultimately, back to my curiosity, I'd love to see other industries and businesses, the challenge they have. Maybe they're similar to what I would have experienced in Heineken and Musgrave and Nestle, and hopefully impart some of the knowledge and experience, mistakes that, I've made in my career and what I've learned from that, and bring it to those companies so that they just get there quicker, and hopefully with less investment, with bigger wins. That's the overall mission of where I believe I can add value because my firsthand experience. And I've nothing against consultants because I can think they have a role to play. And some of the bigger ones out there, we've used them and utilized them, especially when you're looking at global expertise. But I guess what I bring, Steve, is that firsthand experience of the global transformation across many markets, and to hopefully bring that to other businesses.
I'd like to move on to a bit of reflection, really. So, a couple of questions. The first one, what's the best advice you've ever been given?
I was from a CEO. She's now CEO in the US, Maggie Tammany, and it was around building teams and having confidence also in yourself to be authentic. And in building teams, which is really important at the start, when I moved to global and that global transformation role, I tried to build a team that didn't have an ego or no individual egos, at least. So of course, there was functional expertise, there was confidence, there was enjoyment, there was fun. But there was no one there really for themselves where the ego was bigger than the team. And I think, really that advice of thinking beyond the expertise of the individual to how will they improve the value of the team, as we start to deploy this, was really important. And trust me, I brought in people I felt had huge, deep expertise, but it was detrimental to the team.
Is there anything that you know now that you'd wish you'd known earlier?
I think, Steve, definitely from a personal perspective, I would have moved earlier abroad. So if anyone's listening that's considering a career abroad and wondering, should I move, should I not move? So I moved relatively quite late in my career with my family. It was one of the toughest, but definitely the best move I made, both from a business growth perspective and personal perspective, but also for my family. It was really, I think, character building for all of us, and we always look back on that period of time with fondness. I think from a business perspective, if I look back, that conversation we had around value and showing value earlier is important. So even if it's, low hanging fruit, because what we did as a team, we really got embedded in the project and delivery.
Final question, which is a bit of a closing tradition now, which is called B2B buzzword bingo. So can you think of one term or trend in B2B right now that's overhyped and that you wish would just go away, and why?
Something that comes top of mind is seamless integration. I've yet to see it. For me, focusing on the customer, moving that score, being effective and delivering impact. And it may mean starting with smaller technologies, that are not as integrated, and you get there. So for me, just getting momentum at the start, impacting your route to consumer, or your effectiveness with your consumer, in store or in outlet, is more important than having a fantastic, smooth running, seamless technology integrated in the background. So for me, buzzword bingo, I think that's what you call it. For me, that would be it.
So no more seamless integration. It's a thing of the past. Good. All right. Thank you, John. Lovely conversation. It's nice to, we've met a few times, but we've never had a chance to just talk it all through. So that's been good. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, really enjoyed it, Steve. Pleasure, and hope to see you soon.
Well, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, then please visit the Big Light website. There, you'll be able to find other episodes and subscribe to access exclusive content. I'll see you next time.